Hello and welcome to Atomic Facepalm. This is Chris. This is a bite-sized review of Cuphead. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Do appreciate it. As always, you can hit subscribe. That'd be awesome. Or you can leave a comment below and let us know what you think. That was bad. You can let us know what you think about games such as Cuphead or really any other game or anything that comes to mind. Jumping into this one, Cuphead has been in development for, 7 years now. Long time coming, but it has largely been worth the wait. So it started off as a game based off 1930s cartoons, kind of in the style of colored Mickey Mouse animations, sort of along those lines. But the game has changed quite a bit since the studio started making it. The idea is Cuphead, who is a little guy, right here actually, well, most of them anyway. He and his pal Mugman get into a game of dice with the devil, and naturally they lose. They roll snake eyes. And instead of just sacrificing their souls right then and there, they make another deal with the devil that they go around and capture other entity souls that have gotten away from the devil. They can kind of prolong their fate for a little bit. So off they go, and they go out to capture the rest, and that's pretty much the game. Not a whole lot of story, but what is there, it seems appropriate. The developers wanted to shy away from a damsel in distress. They wanted to put Mugman into his own dilemma, and I think they did that well. It feels like a modern take on an old sort of style. Basic gameplay is it's a side-scroller, kind of. Get into that more in a minute. You have a literal like hand pistol that you can shoot. It's called a pea shooter. So it is a shooter at heart, probably more like Contra than anything else. And for those that might not know, Contra came out way back in the 80s for the Nintendo Entertainment System. You can jump, you can dash, you can do this cool little double jump if you hit these little pink objects. And these pink objects vary from being projectiles to little men to pretty much anything that's on the screen. If you can time it perfectly and then you do jump off them, you get a little bit of a boost so you can jump over extra objects. It actually fills up your super meter. And after you fill up your super meter, you get little cards. They show up as like little playing cards in the bottom. And for each one of these whole playing cards you have, you can then activate your superpower. And this can be changed over time, but basically it's one of those things where the more you do damage, or the longer you stay alive, the more opportunities you have to use it. What'll immediately come to... start that one over. What you'll see right away is the really interesting style that Cuphead is. Again, these were hand-drawn cells animated like they would do back in the 1930s, and it really stands out. It also has a very iconic jazz soundtrack, and it has a sort of scratchy record feel that plays over in the background. So even during the loading screen, it's pretty enjoyable. It's like a little hourglass, does little flips and smiles at you. And it really captures that feeling of these whimsical 1930s cartoons. It's like really engrossing. There's something about this art style and the way they did it that makes you just want to stay in the game. And part of the fun is playing the game, sure, but you always want to see what's going to come up next. You want to see what the next boss is going to look like. You want to see what the next stage is going to be. You want to see what kind of creative twist they're going to put on it. And the character designs really do vary. You have kind of like these giant carrot guys that shoot random stuff at you. You've got genies. You've got really anything you can think of, and probably more, honestly. The creativity here is really astounding. And again, this is 7 years worth of work, so you probably would expect about that much. But most of the fun for me really was seeing what are they going to do next? This guy looks awesome. How are they going to improve upon that? And they really do. The more you get into the game, the more and more creative they get. Every time you fight a boss, and boss battles are pretty constant in this, the game actually started out as a boss rush. So instead of having any side-scrolling or any sort of other element, it was just, you just fought the bosses. And then people kind of had a little bit of a, I don't know if we want that entirely. So they went back and they added these side-scrolling stages that you can play intermittently throughout the game. Most of these are like Contra, where you're just on the screen and you go through and you just progress from the beginning to the end and you beat it. There's also stages that are like Gradius. Gradius series was something that came out in the NES and later in the Super Nintendo, where you're the little ship and you can fly around the screen. It's still in a side-scrolling type of thing. They have a really cool play on that as well. But those are the basic gameplay modes. There is also one where you get to defend a little like funeral urn from ghosts, and the only way to kill the ghost is to do your little hop, and they call it a parry. But you hop and you bounce off the little pink ghosts as they come through, and if they touch the little urn in the middle, you lose. But I like how there's only a few ways to play it. It feels like they refined it and really honed in on what works in this game. They didn't go nuts with everything else. it works well. When you go through a stage or you're fighting a boss or pretty much whatever you're doing outside of being in the overworld, there's a little progress bar after you die, and you'll die a lot. And the progress bar kind of shows you how far you got with that stage with that boss. And it's a great little addition that kind of really keeps you coming back because you get so close. You're like, oh man, I was right there. Or if something wasn't working, you'd say, oh, well, clearly I don't want to use that weapon or I don't want to use that strategy because I didn't get very far at all. The overworld itself is heavily inspired, seemingly, by Super Mario World, where your little guy walks around and kind of interacts with random oddities throughout the world. There's even secrets and shortcuts to go to. I had just as much fun in the overworld as I did playing the actual bosses. When you go through certain stages, you can collect coins. There are a very limited amount of these, and I kind of made a mistake early on of buying a few weapons and items just to experiment, but then I figured out there's really not that much money to go around, so you have to be very selective. You won't be able to buy everything. You can buy things such as health upgrades that kind of limit your power a little bit. You can buy different versions of your weapon. Like, for example, I bought a type of a weapon that shoots saw blades straight ahead. They don't go very far, but they go backwards really far. And that, again, changes like your super when you activate it. And when you get in the game, you can configure these weapons, and you can swap between two of them. So you can always have two, not going at the same time, unfortunately, but you have to swap between one or two when you're fighting. There's been a lot of talk about how hard this game is. And the game is certainly hard, don't get me wrong. But this is not hard in the sense where you're beating your head against the wall. This isn't Dark Souls. This isn't a game that feels unfair or just bullet hell. Really, it's about pattern recognition and memorization. So if you're a person that's used to those like really old games in the 1980s, like Battletoads, or well, maybe not Battletoads, that one was almost impossible, but games that really just require you to pay attention and see what they're throwing at you, because this isn't going to be random. They're going to have certain types of attacks, and they'll randomize it in the sense that they'll change it up now and then. But the attacks are pretty much always the same. So whether it's a bouncing boulder or some type of projectile that comes in from both sides of the screen, it's pretty much going to do that the same most of the time. And so there is some twitch-based skill, but this is not a game that's like, oh, well, the bar of entry is just too high. And so long as you're used to just playing a stage or a boss over and over. And luckily, it really doesn't get too annoying to play the same boss over and over again. It can get a little repetitive, depending for how long you spend on the boss. But for me, it seemed like right when it got to that point was usually the part when I beat it. It seems like there's a good amount of time where you spend on these bosses. You get to that point where you're like, oh, I want to beat it so bad. And you beat it, and it feels great. It's like this little mini accomplishment with each stage or boss you beat. You do have the option of playing on an easier mode, but you can't really progress to the next overworld map until you go through and beat everything normally. And for $20, and sadly it's only on Steam and Xbox, so PS4 owners and Switch owners for now are out of luck. Don't know if they have plans to go to those consoles in the future. It'd be great if they did. But for $20, it feels like a criminally low price. This is a high production, high value game, and for me, I would have been happy paying $40 for it. It really does feel like a AAA indie game to a certain degree. So I applaud their efforts, and again, I think they could have easily got away with charging $25 or $30. So pretty much everything is a positive for me, clearly. I really like this game. The reason this is a bite-sized review is I just don't really have the time to play through the whole thing. I put about 10 to 12 hours into it over a couple of days. Your mileage will vary, but for the most part, I would guess, and again, this is just a guess, I would say probably 30 hours or so, but that's all going to depend on how good you are at these types of games to begin with, and really how much you want to explore, or how much you just want to stick to the main stuff. The only real minus that hit me right away was when you first load into a boss battle or a stage, there's a good amount of time on the loading screen. I have a pretty damn good PC, and even with my system, it still took a while. Now, luckily, after you load in the first time and you die, because you're going to die over and over, there's no way around that. There's really no loading at all in between that. It's just that first part of going from the overworld into whatever you're getting into, there's a little bit of a load gap. That will probably be patched out at some point, though. Like I said before, the gameplay can get repetitive, but really not annoyingly so. It's repetitive in a way that feels kind of nice. You feel like you're getting better the more you do it. There were a few times where I was like, I kind of wish I just could get through this part now. But they're few and far between. The only other bad thing is the controls kind of suck. So for whatever reason, on an Xbox One wireless controller, they don't really assign anything to the triggers or bumpers. It's all on the buttons. which is a strange choice. Now, luckily, you can rebind your buttons to your heart's content. I would heavily recommend doing that. Overall conclusion, go ahead and buy the game. It's amazing. This is the type of game that probably will appeal to people who would not necessarily gravitate towards the genre because it has such a strong art style and such a strong motif and such cool period music that I think this is it's doing very well right now and with good cause. So yeah, absolutely. Go out, buy it for $20. Come on. I mean, this is an amazing game. This is a game you want to show off to your friends, you're going to want to talk about. So hell yes, man, go buy Cuphead. Play Cuphead. And it is 2-player too. So local co-op. So if you want to grab a friend and if you have 2 controllers, and this is a great game for your big TV in your living room. So yep, buy Cuphead. Okay, guys, that's it for us this time. Once again, thank you, and you can always hit that subscribe button or leave a comment below. Until next time, good luck and have fun.